from that, I covenanted with the Lord to always follow the promptings of the Spirit. And so that's a lot of the reason I went on the mission. I came across a pretty serious health crisis. I didn't know how serious at the time, but I knew it was serious. Over a 7-month period of time, I felt great love from God daily, and that went a long ways as far as healing me and helping me get through future difficult times that I would go through. You go through these experiences like this, you're very grateful for them after the fact, but not while you're going through it. He's like saying, you're apostatizing from the church. And I says, yes, I know, I'm apostatizing from an apostate church.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 36 of the Clarity Podcast. I'm your host, Claire, and this week's guest was Stanley Heaton. And Stanley has quite the story to share of all of the suffering that he's been through and how it has led him to the commission that God has given him to do in his lifetime. And we're so excited to share all this and more on this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast. Everyone has a journey they're walking. And along that road, we are met with potholes, road bumps, rain, storms, and sometimes just fog. But through it all, we're really just looking for one thing: clarity. Clarity so we can walk with confidence in that next step. There's one source I run to for that clarity. In the darkest of nights, Jesus offers me light that shines through even the thickest storms. Welcome to the Clarity Podcast, where we find clarity through the one who saves us all. Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 36 of the Clarity Podcast. I'm your host, Claire, and this week's guest is Stanley Heaton. Welcome to the podcast, Stanley.
Thank you. Yes, it's good to be here.
I am so excited to hear your story. I've had a little bit of insight into your story, but I'm really excited to hear the details and to see how Christ has guided you in your life. So let's go ahead and jump right into the questions. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us how old you are, where you're from, and a little bit about you.
I'm 61 years old. I grew up in a tiny town in southern Utah by the name of Orderville. I'm the 10th of 12 children, 7 boys, 5 girls. With a small farm, my father taught me to work and all that, so it was a good upbringing for me.
That's awesome. Okay. All right. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about your childhood and tell us what part religion played, what religion you were raised in, and a little bit about you as a kid.
Well, I grew up LDS. Parents were members all their lives, and I was baptized at 8 years old. I was very active, vibrant, happy child growing up. In fact, I injured my foot and crutches were too slow for me, so I hopped on one foot. So that's an example. So I'd be out there playing and hopping on one foot. So
That's awesome. So do you remember the part that the church played in your childhood and kind of what did that look like in your family and kind of the religious patterns you guys followed when you were growing up?
well, we were always active in the church, and we have family home evening prayer. I mean, we weren't real regular about it, but we did do those things.
So do you remember your reasoning for choosing to be baptized when you were 8?
I just knew it's the right thing to do, and it was actually, to this day I remember my baptism. That's 1971. So yeah, it was actually a pretty powerful spiritual experience for me. So that's.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that was like for you?
Well, I asked my older brother to baptize me, and my dad confirmed me. Don't remember much of the program. I just remember being there, and the Spirit came upon me pretty strong when I was baptized. So.
Okay, let's transition into your teenage years. What was it like being raised in the church when you were a young man and growing up and kind of things like young men's? What was the dynamic for you being raised in the church when you were a teenager?
I remember being involved in scouts. We even went on a scout trip all the way up to Yellowstone. That was kind of a highlight. The scoutmaster had a travel all, and we all went. Went around, saw the sights of Yellowstone and camped.
That's cool. That's awesome. So, do you recall having a relationship with Jesus Christ or an understanding of who Jesus Christ was when you were growing up as a youth?
I I knew who he was. I felt a closeness with him almost constantly. And then as I got up into my teenage years, I began to experience some pretty significant hardships. It was necessary for me to have a relationship with Christ in order to get me through these tough times.
Can you tell us a little bit about your hardships during those years and kind of how you partnered with Christ to overcome?
I had a tragic event happen in my childhood. Yeah, I was sexually molested, and then they threatened my life. And what it did was it created an uncontrollable fear of sexual relations, so that when my body started to mature, it created a lot of inner conflict within me. Also, with that, my emotional development actually stopped and stayed as a child, 6 years old, so that even up in my adult years, I was still emotionally a child. Had not Did not enter puberty until many years later.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And can you tell us a little bit about the part that Christ played to help you to get through this and what did you do to get through it?
You just have to do the best you can, and ask the Lord to fill in the rest. I never went to any drugs or alcohol or anything to try to numb the pain. I never did any of that. That was completely out for me. You just do the best you can. And with this stress, it started to take a toll on my health. It was that significant. And then so I went on a mission, and I didn't know this until after I came home, but they almost didn't let me go on a mission because of my health. And they decided to send me to somewhere that had a nice climate and was not too far from home in case I needed help.
So where did you serve on your mission?
San Diego, California.
Okay. All right. So tell us a little bit about your mission experience and what that was like for you. Start by telling us what made you decide to go on a mission.
Oh, I just knew it's the right thing to do for me. And the Lord told me to do that. It was a trying time, because it was really a stretch for me to go knock on doors and introduce myself, because I was really pretty shy, you know. I never dated in high school at all. Had no interest. And I'm not proud of this, but I actually turned down a girl for a girls' preference dance. But it was just made me so uncomfortable. I just I just couldn't see myself doing that.
Yeah. So how did you kind of work through these emotional things you were struggling with so that you were able to do the work on the mission and knock doors? And kind of what did that look like for you?
I just pushed myself very hard. Just put myself out there. I didn't really care. I knew that this is what the Lord wanted me to do. So just before going on my mission, I had a defining moment, um, which would basically give me something to pull upon for the rest of my life that I always tried to do. The Lord prompted me to go with the family to see my future, my brother's wife's family. And even though I knew that it was coming from the Lord, I didn't go because I was uncomfortable. And so I remember feeling like I just, I wish I could hide from the Lord, because I knew that He knew that I hadn't done what He told me to. And so I just wanted to go hide under a rock or something. And so from that, I covenanted with the Lord to always follow the promptings of the Spirit. And so that's a lot of the reason I went on the mission, and I pushed myself to always work hard on the mission and to do what the Lord wanted me to do.
Yeah, that's really neat. Can you tell us about some of the spiritual experiences that you had on your mission?
One in particular was that family had moved there from Minnesota, and they'd been members for about a year, and they were getting ready to go to the temple to be sealed together as a family. And then the mother got swelling in her legs, and they was wondering if they were going to have to postpone their trip to the temple. So they called upon us to come over there and give her a blessing, and we did that. And the spirit was very strong there, and her swelling was alleviated, and they were able to go to the temple. So that was one of the highlights for me.
Oh, that's really cool. So, did you have a lot of like success as far as baptism goes on your mission? And kind of what was that like? Like, did you feel like you were really doing the work of God? Tell us some things about like those things.
Well, I was I don't I'm sure you don't remember this, but there was a time when elders served for 18 months. I
Hmm.
was one of those missionaries that they changed it just before I went out. While I was on my mission, they changed it back, but I didn't have the option. If I would have went a month later, I would have had the option to stay for 2 years, but as it was, it didn't. And then, too, I spent the last 5 months of my mission in the mission office as a referral secretary and recorder. So, but that ended up being the most successful time on my mission. We had several baptisms during that span.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, tell us a little bit about coming home from the mission and what that was like for you, and kind of what part the church played in your young adult years.
I came home from mission and got directly into school. Went out in cabinet and millwork, learned a trade, and then I started working. And the Lord was prompting me to date young ladies. Not that I wanted to, but I did anyway because the Lord was asking me to. And it was a big stretch. And the problem is they had no interest in me because they could see that I had mental problems and was really stressed out emotionally. It was really a trying time for trying to date for those like 5 6 years that I was doing that.
Hmm. So, how did you kind of navigate that? And were you trying to date within singles wards? Kind of what were you doing at that time? And how did Christ kind of help you navigate that?
Well, it was in singles wards, and well, he would just prompt me to date certain girls, and it was just really just do it, and no matter how I felt, is what was my attitude. And it was kind of like a riding a roller coaster because you get your hopes up, and then as a child they're not interested in you, so you fall down really really hard, but then you just have to get back up again. So that's what that was like for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of single adults can relate to that, and that dating just feels like a roller coaster. And there's people that get married really young, and you just keep getting older and older, and you're like, okay, it's not so easy for me. And so, super relatable there. So, tell us what happened next. Kind of what did you do? Um, and what happened next in your life?
Okay, so in 1985 I was working in Provo. I came across a pretty serious health crisis, and I didn't know how serious at the time, but I knew it was serious. So I quit my job, went home to live with my parents for a little while, and tried to get things back in order again. But I wasn't really having success. And my dad found a natural doctor up in Northern California. He made an appointment for me to go up there and to run some tests on me to see what was going on. So what they do is they take a sample of your saliva and your urine, and they can basically tell you about everything that's going on in your body. And in my condition, They wasn't going to send me alone, so my little sister went with me, and we went up to the appointment. After the appointment, the doctor had some pretty grim news for me. I, I remember hearing him say this, and it just kind of shocked me. And he told me two things. He says, if I was 50 years old in my condition, I'd have a stroke. But because of my younger age, that wasn't going to happen. And the second thing he told me is that my body was too far gone in order to recover. So it'd basically take a miracle in order for me to recover from this. After the appointment, my sister and I went up to see some friends in Southern Oregon. They had moved from San Diego up into Oregon. So we were there for several days. I knew that somehow I was going to be okay. I just didn't know for sure how. And so this is what I call my my Abrahamic test. Back then, there's no Google Maps or anything, so I had one of these paper fold-out maps, and the Lord gave me instructions of what I was to do. So on the way home, my instructions is to take nothing with me, get out of the car and walk up in the hills and send my sister home and stay there for several days. So it's probably the hardest thing I ever did. I remember that I was guided by the Spirit in everything I did. The searchers that my parents were going to send to find me were not supposed to find me, and they're not going to find me. And by heeding the promptings of the Spirit, they did not find me. So what happened is I walked out towards a huge sagebrush flat and made tracks in the sand, and then I come face to face with several horses, and the Spirit told me to walk on rocks and go up the big hill that was there. So I remember the first night I didn't make it all the way up. It just a short ways up. And for being the third week in June, it was pretty chilly at night up at that high elevation. But anyway, so the next morning I went up on top and I stayed up there for 2 days. And in the evening of the second day, I was drawn to the far side of the hill. And the Spirit prompted me to go down that side. And because of the late hour, I decided I'll wait till morning. So I basically, the next morning, I was just laying there, and then the Spirit came over me and says, it's time to go. And so I walked down that side of the hill, and I laid down at the bottom of the hill for a little while. And then the Spirit told me, go home. So I walked around the hill, and I got a drink of water out of a fresh spring right there beside the highway. And then I started walking up the highway. And when a car would come by, I'd put my thumb up to hitch a ride. And one of the first cars that came by gave me a ride. And they took me into Austin, Nevada. And they had, when I was walking past the spring, I saw that there was two vehicles there parked. So what happened is they went up the hill looking for me, and I had, at the same time I was walking around the hill and out on the highway, and then they had a guard. There's a canyon you need to go through, and there's a guard stationed on both sides of that canyon to watch for me. And because I got a ride so quick, I went sailing right through that. So when I got into Austin, I went to a payphone. I tried calling collect home. I couldn't get an answer. And after walking around a little bit, I saw my car parked at a motel. So I went and knocked on the door, and just right in front of my car, and my mom answered the door. My dad wanted to be out there looking for me, but they wouldn't let him, and so he was there, and also my younger sister was there. And my dad called the search and rescue, called it off, and we went home. I fasted for another week after that, and then I went on the diet that the doctor had prescribed for me, and I was able to, and with that test of faith and with miracle from God, I was able to pull out of that.
Can you tell us what it was that you were sick with? Did they have a name for it?
It was a number of things. It was poor liver function. My kidneys were not functioning very well. It was hardening of the arteries. I mean, my pancreas wasn't functioning well either. And my digestion was poor. Those are the main things that I remember.
Okay. And so you were able to get well from diet change and following the spirit, basically.
Yes.
All right. That's amazing. That's really cool. So tell us what happened next. What was like your next big step in your spiritual journey?
I moved to Salt Lake and I started working again.
And about how old were you when you were doing this?
When this experience happened to me, I was 22 years old.
Okay.
In 1986, Halloween night, the Friday, was involved in a car accident, but I fell asleep while driving. It was just right on the outskirts of the town where my parents lived. You know how the guardrail is bent down and it's got these posts that stick up above the metal? Well, I rode up on top of the guardrail for like 100 yards, I think, and then it went off the bank, down the bank off the side of the road, and it was running along the guardrail. It knocked a big hole in the gas tank, and then the car got down the bottom, and then it kind of flipped the car and rolled another time and a half. My brother was with me. We were both wearing our seatbelts. We both crawled out and we ran home. My brother didn't even have a scratch on him. I had two cuts, one above the left eye and one above the right ear. And so blood was running down my face. But we ran home, and my dad called the police, and they went and investigated it. And the police officer was absolutely dumbfounded that that car did not catch on fire.
Wow. So God spared your life.
Yes.
That's incredible. Holy cow. And you were 22?
I was 23 at that time. That was a
Okay.
year later. So
Okay, so 23. So kind of what were your feelings at the time? Like did you feel like God had spared your life and did you see God in that moment in your life?
uh, I knew it spared my life. There's no question. I mean, we were there was glass shattering all around inside the car from what we had in the car. So I knew that we were protected.
Wow, that's amazing. It's amazing what God does for us. Um, sounds like you had a mission to fulfill in your life. And so God had to spare you.
Absolutely.
So tell us what happened next. What was kind of your next big spiritual experience in your life?
1989. I'm going to go to there for another experience. I began to experience unreal emotional pain. I got to the point where I could not bear it anymore, and so basically what was happening is I would almost will myself to descend into the depths of hell, knowing that as I did that, it would only be a matter of a few short weeks, and my body would collapse. And again, the Lord spared my life. I was at work one day, and it was like a light went off inside of me, such that my emotions were gone. That means I couldn't go there anymore. Give me time for the Lord to work a miracle in my life and to heal me. You ask, why would the Lord allow such pain come into my life? That's a big question. And for a long time, I didn't know. But in recent years, I've realized why. A year prior to that, I had met a young lady that was I felt very spiritually attracted to, and I asked the Lord to bring us together because she was looking for somebody too. But anyway, what happened was is in the conversation I had with the Lord, He told me no, I could not be with her because I still have a lot of refining to go through for my life, and that He couldn't afford the time for me to be with her. And the Lord told me that I needed to, that He had something in the future that He needed me to do, and it was important that I do it. And I told Him, no, I don't want to do it. As I've looked back on that, um, even though I still received promptings of the Spirit, I lost a layer of protection from the Lord, and the Lord allowed that to come into my life as a way of learning for me. Because when you do things you're not supposed to, there's consequences.
So, did you end up with that girl or did you
Oh
date
no,
her?
no,
Okay, so no.
no.
Okay. Did you end up getting married at some point in your life?
I did in 1990. Yes,
Okay. Okay. So how old were you when you got married then?
27th.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about that story and what happened and how God led you to your wife.
Uh, my brother set me up on a blind date, and so I started dating her, and after a while, I decided I don't want this. It's too much stress on me, and so I was gonna just leave it. In fact, I don't remember. There's at least two times that happened, but she had a dream when she was a child, and she had come back to me saying, "My dream's not going to be fulfilled unless we unless we work this out and just go through it." So I consider it a miracle that I ever got married, but that's what happened.
Okay. All right. And did you guys get married in the temple?
We did got married in the Salt Lake Temple. We have six children, four girls and two boys.
All right. So tell us a little bit about the dynamic that what part did the church play in your life when you were married and starting to have kids, and how were you trying to navigate the church while you were raising your kids within the church?
Well, I we went to church as a family for the first 8 years of my marriage, and then after that, my wife stopped going to church, but I would go and take the kids with me. I don't. I mean, she developed some health issues. I'm sure that was part of it, but she just didn't feel like she wanted to go. But she wanted her children to go. She wanted children to be taught in the in the gospel.
Mhm. So, what were you guys doing in your home to raise your children within the gospel? Were you guys having family home evening or scripture study, or what did that look like?
Family prayer. We've would come and go with scripture study. It's mostly off because of the health issues that I was having and all that was going on in the family. But it was, for the most part, we tried to do our best. So,
Hmm. So, you and your wife were having health issues when you were kind of raising your family?
yes. So
All right.
that leads into the next health crisis I had.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Because my wife was having a lot of pain. It wasn't really a lot wrong with her, but it was, at the time, we felt like it was fibromyalgia. And so that created an extra heavy load on me to go to work, come home, fix dinner, do the dishes, clean the house, and all that. And so in the mid to late 1990s, I would get sick for weeks at a maybe 2 weeks at a time, and just felt awful. And I would every year I would get sinus infection, where the infection was coming out of my eyes. And then in the year 2000, I was ill with something very similar, and I took some over the counter sinus flu medication, and it knocked my liver function down to the point where I was losing my equilibrium and my vision was sporadic. So that was pretty serious. I went to the doctor. They run some tests on me. They says it was my liver was a big issue, but they wanted me to come back in for some more tests. But I didn't do that. I was moved upon very strong by the Spirit to go find my own remedy. So I know it's pretty dangerous to do this, but my wife with my wife not wanting to help me with this, so I ended up driving the car in this condition, just being very, very careful. So what happened was is I found a Chinese remedy that's meant to jumpstart the liver. And I took that and I was right back up on my feet again. But that's not the end of it, because I would just gradually go back down to the poor liver function. And then, two, with this, each time I took it, it would lessen the effect on it would have, so that it would not work as well the next time I used it. So one day I was in the car and I was listening to the radio, and an ad came on, and the Spirit prompted me very strong to listen to this and to get this and start taking it. So what it was, it's called BioLongevity, and what it does is they stack the amino acids in such a way as to stimulate growth hormone. So I started taking this in the year 2000, and it kept me going. And I took it for 11 years, and I had my health was okay. I mean, I wasn't real healthy, but I was doing fine.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome that God was able to lead you to an answer there. So go ahead and tell us a little bit. Let's transition into kind of your awakening journey to the church and kind of what was going on. So tell us, what was like your first step? Obviously, I'm sure health issues woke you up to some things, but what was like your first step to waking up?
Well, in 2010, I started an in-depth study on the second coming of Christ through the scriptures, and it was 3 or 4 years after that. You know, I would listen to talks in general conference about the second coming, and it just didn't match up to what the scriptures say about it. And so that was just kind of a red flag to me that something's not right, even though I still went to church and paid my tithing and all that. But I knew something was amiss. And then when COVID came down, then it was a big red flag for me. And they canceled church. I knew something was up, and I was in some of these social groups that were talking about how the church has gone off the rails and in a state of apostasy. So so I never really did go back, only for just a short period of time.
Mhm. So tell us a little bit about your feelings about what was happening during COVID and kind of your transition from going to church all the time to not going to church all the time, and kind of what was that doing to you, and how were you trying to navigate it?
Well, I was actually navigating it very well. I mean, um, I stopped paying my tithing a few years ago, and I mean, I was studying the scriptures. I wasn't being starving myself spiritually from not going to church. I was still active in studying the scriptures. I knew Joseph Smith was a prophet. I mean, the Book of Mormon was a true record translated by Joseph Smith from God. I knew all that, but I didn't really feel like I wanted to go back to church, and I was certainly not going to wear a mask to church
Mm.
or take any shot. That was completely out. I knew all that.
Did you feel like because of your past history with health problems that that kind of made you aware of what was going on with the shot and the masks?
Yes, it did, but the thing you have to consider though is my parents studied those issues out and did not give me any shots as a child. And so I knew that shots in general were really not good.
Mhm.
And so it was just a no brainer that I was not going to get this shot.
Mhm. So when President Nelson and the church came out and said, the shot is a godsend, what were your feelings when that happened?
No, they're relying on the arm of the flesh. They're being controlled. I felt that like they were being controlled by the powers that be in the government, and they were not standing up for the Lord and asking people to have faith that
Mhm.
they could be healed from this through the priesthood or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. So when you were in this process where you were stopping going to church, did you have any spiritual experiences that God was kind of guiding you to learn more and to gain knowledge in these areas?
Yes, I was continuously learning from the scriptures. I mean, I had a relationship with God, and I was praying. I felt God's love many times in my life. You talk about losing your emotional feeling. How do you come back out of that? Well, for me, through the years, I've felt a lot of love from God, and that's how the Lord has healed a lot of that for me. So I did not lack in a relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, I love that. Love is one of the most healing forces in all the world. And the true love of God it's truly a medicine in a way when we kind of go on these health journeys or these healing journeys that we need to take. And it sounds like throughout your life, you had a lot to heal from with sexual abuse and health problems and emotional problems. And the love of God, He heals. And it sounds like is that kind of what you've experienced throughout your life?
Yes, you go through these experiences like this, and you're very grateful for them after the fact, but not while you're going through it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah,
So,
totally. Yeah.
it really does something for you as far as refinement in your heart, and the Lord gives you spiritual experiences to help you get through all these difficult times. So
Mhm.
there's really a silver lining in all that suffering you go through. So that's my view on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've currently been studying really deep into the book of Job, and Job is like this beautiful example to us of how suffering is so necessary, but we don't necessarily have to respond to it with, "Oh, this is great. We're suffering, but it's fine. Everything's good." We don't have to necessarily be positive in the moment because we have to let out that soul cry to God. And Jesus meets us in our worst moments. He meets us in those moments of pain and suffering and weakness, but he doesn't leave us there. He helps us to grow and to become better through them, but we need those refining moments in our life, and I think that's really what we learned through Job. And so, um, maybe tell us a little bit how, Christ kind of carried you out of some of these suffering moments and how that was kind of an awakening to you.
Over a 7 month period span of time in 1998, I was 35. Over a 7 month period of time, I felt great love from God daily, and that went a long ways as far as healing me and helping me get through future difficult times that I would go through.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love those moments when God just pours into us. That's really what we need.
It
So,
is.
yeah. Tell us a little bit more about your awakening journey and kind of what was the next step once you kind of stopped going to church? What were you learning at the time and what were some of the truths that God was revealing to you?
In 2022, the Lord prompted me to go back to church, but only on fast Sundays. And so I'd go to church on fast Sundays, and then I would bear my testimony of Christ. And I was do this every month for several months. And it was kind of a strange going back to church after being gone for a few years. But people were glad to see me again. I was not happy with what I felt at church. It was just like a drag on me, really. And then when I stopped wearing the temple garment, it felt like a burden had been lifted from me. So I didn't regret any of that. So, and my relationship with the Lord continued to improve. So,
Can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to remove the temple garment?
oh, we were talking about it in one of these groups that I was a part of, as we would talk among each other and encourage each other to do certain things according to what the Spirit has been prompting us.
And you felt like your relationship with Christ got better after you removed the garment? And did you feel like a freedom in Christ, would you say?
I did, yes, I really did. It felt like a burden that lifted from me. I felt good.
So were you still going back to church on past Sundays even after you made this decision?
Yeah, it was just for 3 or 4 months. That was all.
Okay. So what were some of your experiences going back to church during this time and kind of what was it like?
People would come up to me after me and thank me for my testimony. And then one experience I had is in the month of October 2022, right after General Conference. The first Sunday after General Conference was Fast Sunday. I was very uncomfortable doing this, but the Spirit prompted me to get up there and tell the congregation that the church is in a state of apostasy. But, you know, I had learned that I gotta follow those promptings of the Spirit, so that's what I did. I got up there and first I bore my testimony of Christ, and then I told the congregation that the church is in a state of apostasy. The thing of it was is the bishop wasn't there, but he was probably listening to it on video though. You know how they for COVID they started video the meetings.
Mhm.
But then I was surprised that the counselor behind me, right after I said amen, he said a loud amen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't know what to think of that at first, but then as I've analyzed it since, he was just glad I was done. That's all.
Mm.
He wasn't agreeing with me.
Oh, that's too bad. His spirit was agreeing with you.
Yeah, so
So did you have any, you know, consequences from the church for doing that?
yeah, I got called in by the bishop.
Okay, so
Uh,
tell us about that. What happened when you got called in by the bishop?
well, 2 weeks later, I went in to see the bishop. He really wanted to talk to me. He really called me out on the carpet for doing that. He threatened to call the police, and he threatened to bring excommunication if I tried to do that again. And what he really wanted me to do is to back down on my stance, but I was not having none of that. I really think that it was for for the bishop's benefit, the Lord prompted me to do that. That's really what I think. So I could have a talk with him.
So, what were some of your responses to the bishop that you felt maybe impacted his life, or did he listen to anything that you had to say?
No, he didn't listen to any of it.
So, what did you say?
Well, he's like saying, you're apostatizing from the church. And I says, yes, I know, I'm apostatizing from an apostate church. So he was just not gonna buy what I had to say.
Yeah, for sure. So, did your records eventually get removed, or are your records still in the church?
No, they're still in the church.
Okay. So kind of tell us your feelings about that, and, do you plan to remove them? What do you feel about your records still being in the church, and what does the gospel look like to you now in your life?
Oh yeah, I don't see a need to remove them right now. With what else I'm doing, I'm sure that will just take care of itself. I'm
Mhm.
not worried about that. I mean, at some point they will be removed.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you're doing now?
I'm writing a book.
So tell us about your book. What are you writing it about? And maybe give us some insight on the title and when it might be coming out.
I'll tell you how I got started on this journey.
Okay, awesome. Do it.
So it was mid-April in 2021. This is actually before I was bearing my testimony in sacrament meeting. So I woke up to a night vision and I saw the cover of a book. That morning and the very next morning, I had the Spirit come over me to reveal a hidden aspect of the book of Revelation. So from what I was able to write as dictated by the Spirit, I realized I knew that God wanted me to unseal the book of Revelation and reveal it to the world. And I've told a number of people that I'm doing this, and I really don't blame people for not believing me, because in the Book of Mormon it is prophesied that this would happen before the latter day events that are talked about in the book of Revelation come to pass. But my journey since then has been such that I know the Lord has guided me in this. And I'm straightforward when it comes to speaking about the church and as it relates to the book of Revelation, to let people know that the church is in a state of apostasy.
Yeah. So do you know what the title of your book is?
Yeah, it's the book of Revelation revealed. It's what I
Okay.
saw.
All
So,
right. So how far along are you on this book? And do you have an idea of when you're going to publish it?
so I want to just give you a little idea of the process I'm going through for writing this book. I just start writing commentary the best that I can, and then once I get through all the chapters, I just go back through again and again and again, seeking further enlightenment and seeking if there's any corrections that need to be made. There's at least one chapter that I had basically had to completely start over on the commentary for it at least once, but for the most part, it's just been added upon line by line as the Lord reveals things to me. And so I did okay. And then, as far as the first couple of years go, but then in at the end of May of 2023, I really kicked it into high gears, so to speak. Um, I felt moved upon by the Spirit to do so. I would get up every morning, like 4 or 5 a.m., and work on it for a couple hours before work. And then I would work on it for maybe 4 or 5 hours on Saturdays. And then I'd put in a long 10, 12-hour day on Sundays. So much of what was revealed to me and what I've written came in that's 6 months from the end of May until about the beginning of December. And I got all the way through it. But the problem is I'm not very good at English. My grammar's not, I don't know grammar very good. Sentence structure I struggle with, and spelling and all that. And so I'm actually, I brought on a co-author to help me with the book. And so that's what we're doing now. We're going back through it again, and revising it some, and changing it so it's more readable and such.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So, do you have a timetable for when you'd like to publish this book?
I'm not sure exactly when. I think it'll be next year sometime.
Okay.
Maybe I'm hoping by spring, but it could be summer or fall. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really neat. And, we're coming to a time in this world where revelation is something people need to start reading and studying and understanding that book for sure. Um, Things are turning in the world. And I think all of us who are in this place where we're awake, we're seeing it. And I think we're all seeking to follow God during this crazy time in our world. And so I think what you're doing a good work, and it needs to come out. And so keep working on it and keep doing what you're doing. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, we will. I mean, it's very enlightening. I had no clue when I started this how much is actually revealed in the Book of Revelations. It is not so much about what we've been taught to believe it's about. There's key phrases and key words in the book that just that if to have them revealed to you is just very eye opening. And there's been many times as I've studied the scriptures that I haven't had understanding of certain principles. Um, there just wasn't really talked about, and there's really not a lot of explanation in the scriptures for what those some of these mysteries mean. But through going through the Book of Revelation, it has really answered almost all of those questions for me, and really brought my understanding of the gospel to a whole new level. So I'm
That's
very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Could you give us maybe like one sneak peek of like maybe something that's really stuck out to you in the book of Revelation and what God has taught you about it?
Sure, I'm not going to reveal too much right now, but as you can understand, I guess the one thing that I can talk about is, in First Nephi chapter 14, and then in Ether chapter 4, and then in the whole chapter of Third Nephi 21, it talks about the work of the Father. Exactly what is that? And that's the one of the things that I reveal in my book. What is the work of the Father? I basically, I guess I can explain just a little bit about it. It's Christ performed the atonement, and so he's fulfilled his mission and work for this earth in preparation. So what the work of the Father is working through a servant in the latter days to bring glory to Christ is basically what it is. That's the work of the Father. It's what he does through a servant.
Wow, that's really awesome. Okay, well, I don't know about the rest of our audience, but I'm super excited for this book to come out. So, definitely when it comes out, you let me know and we'll promote it on the podcast.
All right.
All right. Okay. Stanley, I want to thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I want to end with the question that I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, which is how do you find clarity in your life now? You've been through a lot, and what your story reminds me of is the scripture where it talks about how God brings forth the weak things of this world to do his work. And the reason why is because you've been through so much with your health and with the things you've been through, and God has called you to do a great work. And so I would just want you to know, I think that's amazing. Tell us, how do you find clarity in your life now?
I find clarity through being humble and prayerful. If we're gonna have pride, then we cannot hear the Lord. We're not gonna hear Him. I value my relationship with the Lord, and so I'm gonna hold on to that. So through studying the Scriptures, through following the promptings of the Spirit, through having faith, and always striving to be more obedient to the Lord, that's what I always search for.
I love that. I love how you said that we find it through being humble and prayerful. That's beautiful. And I think it would do us all well to be more humble and prayerful. So thank you so much, Stanley, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you guys are interested in joining us for an episode of the Clarity Podcast where you share your story of how you have left mainstream religion to follow Jesus Christ, please feel free to reach out to me at clarity.podcast@gmail.com, or you can find me on my website at forgedinhisfire.com, or you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Forged in His Fire. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us on this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast.